She is the daughter of the founder of Sheraton Hotels. She married what is the cutest relationship, Frank Perdue, like literally, like look at her grinning. Woo! And she is an entrepreneur herself. She's a best-selling author. She has created a new company with her children in farming, and we're going to learn all about her today. Mitzi, welcome. Woo!
What a joy to be here.
So Mitzi, wait, first of all, here, take this so people hear you. Okay, cool. And so Mitzi, tell us a little bit about like growing up. You know, what was it like, your father? What did you learn as a child, you know, being the daughter of the founder of Sheraton Hotels?
All right, the founder of Sheraton Hotels, it might look as if he sprung out of nowhere, but in fact, the Henderson family, the Henderson Estate Company, began in 1840. And so he was actually following in the footsteps of people who had come before him. And he had an interesting story. He's, at age 26, he was so shy and so socially inept that when my mother had just gotten engaged to my father and went to meet her future mother-in-law, Berta Henderson, said, "Molly, don't marry Ernest. He can never stick with anything. You'll end up poor." Well, Ernest Henderson did something that kind of guides my life a little bit. At age 26, and he had just gotten married, and it was true, he never could stick to anything, and he didn't seem to have good relations. I mean, he was just your basic mess. But Mother's answer to Grandma Berta, by the way, was, "I don't care if I'm poor, I love him." I see a great big smile there. Yes, we like love. So Father went to a career guidance counselor. His name was Johnson O'Connor, and it was in Boston. And the family lore is that he found this name out of the phone book. And he went to Johnson O'Connor, and Johnson O'Connor spent hours with him going through all sorts of tests, you know, finding out what was going on with him. And one of the tests, and again, this is family lore, what I grew up with, was Johnson O'Connor put my father through a whole series of word association tests. And this is like, I don't know, 1923 technology. I'm sure they're much more sophisticated about it today. But Johnson O'Connor would say the word blue. Now, most people would have some variation of red or green, or some association that the rest of us could relate to. Father's answer, blue, first thing that comes into your mind, fingernail. He'd ask hot. And most of us would have some version of cold or maybe a hot sun or something. Father's was a box of crayons. And it was this way in every single one of the word association tests. And Johnson O'Connor told my father, the tests show that you're a very bright person, but you have the most unconnected mind to the way other people think, that your career should be as a scientist, because you are a bright fellow, and you're good at math and so on. But what you really should do is you should be in a laboratory, behind a bench, not interacting with other people, and you could probably contribute to the world. So Father heard this. And what he did with that information was he decided, I'm going to learn how to connect with people. I'm going to learn how to relate and what makes them tick. And he put as much effort into that as some of us here might put into getting a doctorate. I mean, he studied it. And I know that every couple of years he would read and reread Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he did it because he wanted to understand what made other people tick. He took courses, he read books. Later on in life, I know that he even made friends with famous psychologists like Eddie Bernays, who is known as the father of like psychological approach to advertising, or B.F. Skinner, who would be a guest at our home frequently. He was the father, I think, of like behavioral science. Father put so much effort into overcoming his deep impediment of not knowing how to relate to people, that in the end, as the founder of the Sheraton Hotels and becoming a genial host, at the end of his life, there were 400 hotels. And I'm going to guess that other than national politicians, there are few people in our country who had to interact successfully and do a good job of it. You know, the genial host of 400 hotels, interacting with people constantly and doing public speaking and doing pretty much every possible thing that Johnson O'Connor told him he was incapable of doing. Well, we drew, you know, we being my siblings and I, there were 5 of us, the idea that you can have a serious impediment, but you can transcend yourself and you can become more than you were born with. And I love that heritage of transcend your shortcomings.
So what was your shortcoming?
What was my
Growing
shortcoming? Can we fast forward to grown up already?
Okay, go ahead.
All right, at 38, I was born in 1941. And by the way, if you want to do the math, I'll say I'm 78 and proud of it.
Wow.
We're gonna get into the health aspects and what she does to keep looking like this in this active. Woohoo!
Yeah, but I'll give you a short circuit answer to it.
Okay.
Eat chicken.
What if you're a vegetarian?
Change. No, Perdue chicken is it's no antibiotics ever, and we're the largest producer of organic chicken in the world. But that's another story. Back to my shortcoming and something that was like in the back of my mind at age 38. At age 38, at that point in my life, I was a rice grower. Growing, and you probably heard me correctly, growing rice, you know, the stuff that you eat with chopsticks, if you're in Asia. At age 38, I wanted a career in television. And I actually had auditioned and got a local show, but I also had a very severe lisp. And a lisp, by the way, if it's severe enough, it's not just something you hear, it's something you see, because your tongue is where it shouldn't be. And for a good bit of my life, I was aware, because good friends would tell me, you know, after they'd known me for a while, that they initially assumed that I was stupid because of this lisp. And that meant in the end that I became extremely shy. It was hard for me to meet people knowing that they would think that I was stupid. And I became sort of more and more withdrawn. But I did have this television show, and it occurred to me one bright day, rather early on, that for the amount of work for hosting and producing a television show, this was out of the CBS affiliate in Sacramento, that for the same amount of work, I could make an awful lot more money if I could get it syndicated. But I also learned that there would be no possible sponsor who would even hope to have a success of a TV show if the speaker, if the presenter, you know, had this tongue thrust thing that was just frankly ugly and made her look stupid. So at that point, I'm thinking, you know, echoing back from childhood, of father who would overcome something which is much more severe than mine, but nevertheless, back in 1978, the speech pathologist at that point in the development of that particular specialty, they didn't have the tools that they now have for helping people overcome lisps. But I felt that, you know, my future depended on overcoming the lisp. I went to a speech pathologist, and she said there hasn't been any case as of now of somebody at age 38 overcoming it. She also said that, you know, she wouldn't take me because there was no point. So I went to another. I got exactly the same story. I went to a third, and the third woman, she was British, and, you know, friendly and warm and encouraging, and she told me, not a chance. There's no case of somebody at your age with a lisp, at your degree of severity, who has overcome it. But, you know, echoing my father's story, I started thinking, I'm going to do this. And I said, even if you think it can't be done, will you take my money? And she said, sure. For the first 9 months of twice a week, me driving from Davis, California to Sacramento, the outer edges of it, it was an hour trip both ways. I would go, and there was no success of any sort because I couldn't hear the difference. And to move your tongue, if you've never, I mean, all of us, presuming that you don't have lisps, all of us can curl your tongue in exactly the right way, and you do it naturally where it belongs. But supposing that you have never used that muscle in your entire life, and I used to compare that to the idea that if I asked you, touch your ear for a moment. Okay, if I asked you to wrap your earlobe around your finger, could you do it? And no, you couldn't because there are no muscles there, none. Well, that was the case with me. So I couldn't hear the difference and I couldn't form it. But you know, again, echoing my father with his disability, I'm not sure it's fair to call it a disability, but the thing that he was born with, I decided not to give up. And I simply tried and tried and tried and tried and tried. And you know, 9 months are going by and I still can't hear the difference and I can't move my tongue. But then one day, just the slightest ability to hear, I could hear it. And then I had something to build on. But still there was the business of, you know, wrapping your earlobe around your finger when there are no muscles to do that with. But I did keep trying until, you know, one day I had it. I didn't have it right, but I had it that I was able to move my tongue. It was just a little teeniest bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, until I can remember the day when I was going to try to go a whole day without lisping. And I discovered that I could. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I made a real effort to get my show syndicated, and a wonderful thing happened. For 8 years, I had a syndicated television show.
So how many stations, and what was the basis for the syndicated show?
Okay, here we come into entrepreneurial stuff.
Woo!
Okay, entrepreneurial stuff. I told you that I had this wonderful, brave, fascinating insight that I could make a lot more money if I could syndicate it.
Did you like really need money, or was it just something inside you that you were like, I'm going to be successful at this?
I look at money the way that my late husband did. Frank Perdue, he had no interest in money other than as a way of keeping score. He was the kind of person, this is a little sidelight and I'll get back to the other, but Frank Perdue spent less money than you can imagine. He'd give it away to charity, but in the 17 years of our marriage, he bought 3 pairs of shoes because the other shoes, when there was holes in them, I'd taken to the cobblers because he just, spending money didn't mean anything to him. And in my own case, no, I didn't really need the money. But it was a way of keeping score. But it was also a way of, the television that I had, I was in agriculture at that point, and I wanted the urban public to know some of what...
And this is the rice farming?
This is the rice farming.
Okay. And how did you get into rice farming? I mean, what was the, of all things, rice?
All right, first the entrepreneurial stuff, which I think might be, I hope, of greatest interest. How do I sell a television show that it had been doing really quite well locally in Sacramento, but how do I sell it? Yeah, how do I even approach a national sponsor? So, this is going to sound like a Dale Carnegie commercial, but the Dale Carnegie system has a 14-week salesmanship course. I knew nothing whatsoever about salesmanship, but I thought, you know, to get to where I wanted to be, which was national syndication, from where I was, somebody who was shy and who was just overcoming lifelong terror of interaction with human beings, knowing that they'd all think I was stupid, to make that leap, I decided I had to learn principles of salesmanship. And I read books on it right and left, but honest, the most help was the Dale Carnegie course. In the Dale Carnegie course, one of the principles of it was they want you, almost to pass the course, they want you to make a sale. Well, this would be the first sale of my life. And it was one that was in the millions of dollars because to sponsor my show.
Millions of dollars? And what year was this?
I think we're 1980 now.
That's like, how much is that in today's money? That's a lot of money.
Well,
Right?
not-
Is that what is that like in today's money? Does anybody know? Come on, there's some
2 or 3
finance.
times that at least.
Wow.
Maybe 4 times. But it's not that they were paying me. It's that that's what it would cost them to
Yeah,
sponsor.
but you sold that sponsorship. That's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah, so my first sale is in the millions of dollars.
Woo!
I mean, yay, Dale Carnegie. But as part of the course, they want you to prepare like your sales pitch, all your documents. They want you, and before you go after your real target audience, they want you to practice on a company. Well, I thought the focus on farming, which became Country Magazine, the real point of it was I would interview farmers and I'd go out in their farms and I'd tell what it takes to grow a tomato or asparagus or peaches, whatever. And I would always include things that the non-farm public would find important, like saving time, nutrition, or money. And so I actually developed my show, which took 3 people to produce, and it was early in the morning. It had the equivalent audience, it had the same audience as the noon news that took 40 people to produce.
Wow.
So I knew I was onto something, but this came a little bit from my study of salesmanship, that the things that keep people interested and coming back, at least in television. They spent millions of dollars, and this is 1980s information. I don't know if it's changed, but in the 1980s, if you wanted people to pay attention, this $1 million study said, and this was from CBS, that sex, violence, and humor are the top. Well, I couldn't deliver much of that, much as I'd like to.
And then Frank Perdue came in?
Well, let's get into the sex part. Okay, so after sex, violence, and humor, what did people care about? They cared about health, they cared about nutrition, they cared about saving time. Well, food is very important for all of that. So I would make sure that every show that I ever produced would have hooks that would keep people engaged. Plus, it's inherently just fascinating to see some of the equipment that it takes. And there would always be just insanely interesting information that the farmer could tell. For example, with tomatoes, the saving time nutrition, or with tomatoes, the producer would say that he recommends, or she, whichever, let's say she recommends, don't refrigerate a tomato because there are almost 800 chemical processes going on inside a tomato that are adversely affected by temperature. Nature didn't intend a tomato to encounter 40 degrees temperature, which is what your refrigerator is. And if you leave it in there like overnight, it's not going to have the great sparkling taste that a fresh one does. So that was the kind of information that I would include in my shows. Well, so how do I sell it? I thought that the perfect sponsor for this would be a big supermarket chain. It was Safeway at that point. And so I actually had an appointment to present my idea for them sponsoring my show. And I practiced 100 times. I knew my pitch like the Lord's Prayer practically. I mean, I had this thing nailed. But Dale Carnegie simply insisted that you don't go to your best prospect first. You go to just anyone so that you can practice and see what you're doing wrong. Well, I thought that DuPont was a company that was very interested in agriculture, and I learned just by reading the newspapers that the vice president, or a vice president of DuPont, was going to be in California. And I thought, what better way to get to him than to invite him to be in my show? And he was in Los Angeles, I was in Sacramento, but nevertheless, I invited him to be on my show. He accepted, and everybody, the television crew and everybody was just on the alert to make a good impression on this guy. And it went well enough so that at the end he said, you know, if you're ever in Wilmington, call on me. And I said, I'd love to, because I've got this idea for a show. And pretty soon I have an appointment to visit with the vice president of DuPont. And I made the pitch to him. But before I did some research on him. I felt that before making the pitch, I knew more about him than his psychiatrist did, because I'd talked with people who worked with him. I read everything that he'd ever written. And when I actually had the chance to make my pitch at DuPont, he said, I'd like you to meet some of the people who were it to be carried out that you'd need to meet. And I got to meet 12 other people at the DuPont headquarters. Now, at this point, I had no idea how corporate America worked. I mean, I knew something about rice farming and a little about television, but no idea how, so it was me.
Let me go back for one second. How'd you get into rice farming? Just quickly, because I'm like,
Okay, I got into rice farming because when my father died, I had an inheritance, and I thought I could have somebody manage it for me in the stock market, but I thought it was just vastly more interesting, since I was living in California, to invest in rice land. And to prepare for investing, you know, a chunk of my net worth in agricultural land, I spent 4 years taking courses. And the things that I studied, everything that I could think of having to do with agriculture, like rural appraisal, agronomy, agricultural accounting, just, you know, a whole panoply of stuff to prepare for it. And my motive for this was partly that I thought that my land, since I was near an agricultural university, the University of California at Davis, I thought my land could be useful for scientific experiments, and it was. So that's the brief story of how I got into that. But to finish, I've got 1 minute more to say about DuPont.
Go ahead.
Okay, with DuPont, then I'm suddenly, Dale Wolf, the vice president at that point, said, you know, there's really something to this. Why don't you write up a proposal? So I go back to California, and I write up my best version of the proposal. But then, since I'd met 12 of the people under him, the people who report to him, I asked each of them, I showed them the proposal, and this is all by phone or by mail. And by the end of talking with all of them, I'd changed almost every word, because they told me the buzzwords to use and the ones, don't say that. And so finally I submitted the proposal to Dale Wolf, and he said, you know, I really like this, but let me show it to my people to see what they think. And I'm thinking, they helped me write it. I'm in.
And well, what did we learn from that? I mean, we learned the fact that you got to do your research, and you really did.
I don't think.
And you have to follow Dale Carnegie's.
Well, I am a fan of Dale Carnegie. I think you could get the same, or you can get the same information from other books, but I liked it because it was a whole group of people, you know, overcoming their fears and learning to deal with no, and so I am a fan of Dale Carnegie.
Okay, so now let's fast forward, right? You've got this fantastic syndicated column and show, and life is great. And then what happens? You go to get chicken somewhere, or what happened? Like, how did you end up meeting Frank?
Okay, in 1988, I did have a syndicated column, a syndicated TV show, and a syndicated radio show, because the Dale Carnegie course in salesmanship, I mean, if any of you haven't taken salesmanship, and if you want it, salesmanship is about persuasion. And I think the ability to be persuasive is just all important. But so in 1988, you know, all my dreams are coming true. But I'm single. I went to a party in Washington, D.C., and at this party was this just strikingly attractive guy. And I'm at the party, and they're probably in this room, there are probably twice as many people as in this room. And I'm at the party, but this stranger comes in, and I remember thinking at the moment that, you know, he must really be somebody, because in the West Coast they don't have the Perdue ads. But I watched as if it was the parting of the Red Sea. As you know, he came in, people swept aside, and they began lining up to talk with him. And now, so I'm just really curious who this person is. And normally I don't like to shake hands with celebrities because it means nothing to them, and it takes up time. But he looked really attractive, and I thought it would be fun to shake his hand. Well, we did shake hands, and we started talking. And the first 5 minutes, it came out that both of us were divorced. And then it came out that both of us were absolutely certain that we would never, under any possibility, consider the prospect of the notion of the thought of remarriage. And the reason why was because we thought marriage was an institution designed to make people miserable. But then, somewhere like 5 minutes into it, we discovered mutually that it was kind of a shame that we had that attitude because it meant growing old alone. But that was our fate because we could never trust anybody. And then he looked down at me and he said, I believe I could trust you. Oh. And I looked up at him and I said, I believe I could trust you.
This is the first meeting? Like, this is like the first 5 minutes? No way.
Well, it did take 5 minutes to get to the good stuff because
and all these people are around you and you guys have all just decided. I can't even imagine this, but okay, go ahead.
Well, the next 5 minutes, when I'd said that I could trust him, and because trust was, I learned later that was just for him the most important thing, and it's certainly the most important thing for me. We began spending the rest of our time talking about the rest of the time, meaning the next 5 minutes, because I had to leave for another engagement. We discussed what our marriage would be like, and it would be supportive, not competitive, and would be there for each other for the good times and the bad times.
Wait, I can't imagine this. This is a little out there. Wait, what do you mean? You're sitting there at this party. There's twice as many people that are in here right now, and you meet him. No one else is around, and in this little conversation, this is all happening. Wow.
Well,
woo!
Well, then let me tell you the P.S.
Oh, P.S., go ahead.
Okay, the P.S. was, I had to go back to California, and
wait. How did the conversation end? We're gonna go to California now. We gotta go. Wait, just let's finish. So that was the first meeting, and at the end, after you discussed marriage and you trust each other, what happened?
Well,
how did you end that? That was in 88.
I've got to go. That's literally true. I had someplace else I had to be, and that was it. But when I got back, I got back about 5 days later because I had some speaking to do at different. I was involved with women's agricultural politics at that point, and I was president of the oldest and largest farm women's organization, and I had to give speeches at different chapters. So I got back many days later, and there were all these, on my desk were all these nice pink while you were out slips saying that Frank Perdue had called. And he called, the next time we spoke, or the first time we spoke for that matter, by phone. His first words were, I've never been more serious in my life. And I said, me too. And well, we talked for an hour every night.
What sign was he?
What is May 9th?
Is that like Gemini?
Taurus.
Taurus. Oh,
Yes, it's
what are
Taurus.
you?
I'm Aries.
Oh, wow, okay.
It worked. Well, so somewhere around a month later, I go back to Salisbury, Maryland to spend some time with him, and he gave me my engagement ring.
Wait a minute, after how long? A week? 2 weeks?
Of knowing each other in person, maybe 2 hours.
Shut up. No. Wait, you're telling me you had a comment, then you leave and you get all these pink slips and you talk on the phone, right? And then you go back in like the second meeting? Wow.
Well, then let me tell you about the third
There's
meeting.
hope for everybody. I mean, are you kidding me? Okay.
I am not kidding you, but I'll tell you my favorite moment in life. Would you like to hear my favorite moment in life?
Go ahead.
Okay, the third time I came back to see him, our church, I'm not terribly religious, but I'm culturally Episcopalian. And our church had a 6 weeks prenuptial counseling period. The minister wouldn't marry you if you hadn't had 6 weeks of prenuptial counseling. And we wanted to start the clock ticking. So we go to Reverend Draesel, an Episcopalian minister, and he's saying, "Oh, I'm so happy for you. This is wonderful. How long have you known each other?" And I said, "Do you mean in person?" And he said, "Well, yes." And I said, 36 hours?
So was your column at that time, like, were you writing about, like, sex?
No, my column was about food and agriculture.
Ah! All right, so wait. Okay, so now fast forward. You now got married, like, right away?
We got married 6 weeks later.
Wow. And assuming you were always eating chicken?
Frank didn't like, he was rather narrow in his food preferences. He liked fish, he liked pasta, and he loved chicken, and he didn't like any of the red meats. He didn't like anything that cuddles its young.
Oh. Okay, so now, this is so cute. Oh my gosh. Okay, so now, Mitzi.
May I jump in and say something about when we were talking about cuddling their young and Frank and eating?
Yeah. Sure, why not?
Okay, we were married 17 really happy years, and there was only one time that he was really seriously angry at me, as in raising his voice, because otherwise he's very easy to get along with. But there was one case where he's really mad at me, and it involved the following. I do magic tricks as a hobby.
What do you do?
What do I do? Well, the particular case it's one where you take a chicken egg, and you accidentally drop it, and it looks as if that gets everybody's mind, that these things are fragile, because, it splats. But you take another one out of the same box, and you put it in a magic bag, and the pattern that would go with this one was, Frank is really good at raising chickens, but it takes him 21 days for one to hatch. I can make it hatch in 30 seconds, and here's how you do it. And then I take a pretend hammer.
Is that how he fell in love with you? Was that the reason? I mean, is that how he increased his business?
Well, if I wish I could tell him how to do it, but this is where he got mad at me. I can take a hammer and smash in the magic bag and smash the egg, but in fact it's a blown egg so it's hollow. But everybody has it in their mind that it's a gooey, yucky thing. Well, so I smash the egg and then reach in, and out comes a live chicken, a little baby chick. Well, he was polite during the time that I was doing this in front of guests, but afterwards, he was really angry. Don't you ever do that again. And I'm just quailing because he's never spoken sharply to me before. And he's really angry. And he's really angry because he said, you can't do that, because a baby chick, if you put it in that black bag, it's not meeting its social and emotional needs.
Aww.
So don't ever do that again, and trust me, that's one trick I took out of my repertoire.
Ah! Okay, so now you're married to Frank Perdue. What happened with the rice farm?
Oh, I have two.
Are they chicken farms now?
No, well, actually, the rice farms, I sold them to a nature reserve because by great good fortune, as far as I'm concerned, they had the giant endangered garter snake and the highly endangered fairy shrimp. That meant that nature reserves wanted it. So I sold it to nature reserves, and then with the profits of that, I invested in vineyards, and my sons run those now.
So, okay, let's talk about, how did you create these amazing sons, entrepreneurial sons? Let's talk about, what was your tips and, what was your guidance to them to make them who they are today and this successful business?
Okay, I was a fairly mean mother. I was out to make things difficult for them rather than easy.
And Frank was okay with that?
These were my children by a previous marriage.
And wait, how many times have you been married?
I've been married twice.
Okay.
Okay, the first marriage, which was bitterly unhappy, but did produce two good sons. And what made them entrepreneurial? They they were in their teens when I married Frank, so they had, one heck of a role model. But then they also knew a lot about their heritage of their grandfather, and his starts and fits and overcoming difficulties. And so one of them, he's a scientist. He has a PhD from Harvard in molecular biology, and within that, or in addition to that, computer science and genetics. And the idea of being entrepreneurial to him was just so exciting and attractive, because when you commercialize something, which he's working on right now, it has a chance of impacting so many people. And so he has 4 patents, and he's working on commercializing them right now. My other son, he's an entrepreneur within Purdue. He works, he's 2 years after Frank's death, his stepbrother appointed him vice president, and he's in charge of creating new companies within Purdue, which is very, very exciting. Then they tend to be, Purdue is staking out an area, sort of our identity now is being organic and being antibiotic free. And they're just wonderful things that you can do within that. And I would love to tell you about them, but they're proprietary.
Literally, Mitzi, we could be here all day with you. I could have to tell you, but we don't have a lot of time, and I don't know what to do. But okay, we're gonna figure this out. Okay, so first of all, Mitzi, tell us, growing up, what was the advice you remember from your father? Like the one short piece of advice.
Whatever I wanted, and I grew up with people who were from a similar financial background. And I'd see them getting all these wonderful goodies and things, and I'd say, Daddy, can I get that? And his answer invariably was, earn it. So I found that in the end really great advice, because I think that's a good approach to life. Earn it rather than just have Daddy drop it in your lap.
I agree. Now, what was the greatest advice from Frank that you remember? Sure.
Well, his first piece of advice always was that integrity trumps everything. Be a person that people can trust. And then one that I just treasure, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you.
I like that one. Woo! So, okay, is there questions? Does anybody have any questions? Oh my gosh, how can you not have questions for Mitzi? Are you kidding? Okay, wait, first we'll go up here. Go ahead, Dana.
Go ahead. Hi. Very interesting. Thank you very much for that. We'd just like to hear a little more about, I guess, your father's growing up in that environment. Were you ever working there, or your kids working there, or kind of like that part of your life, which is the earlier, the first 4 years of your life? 38 years. You started after.
Okay, the answer to that, the overall theme of my answer to that is, good Lord, how far we've come. Because, as I said, I was born in 1941. I don't think it ever occurred to my father even once that I would work in the hotel company.
Why, because you were a woman?
Yeah, because my brothers did. But then on top of that, I have 2 sisters who are older than me. They never worked. I was the first woman. Oh, and I had 2 aunts who never worked. In the 1940s, 1950s, I don't think it was, if my father were alive today, it would be a different story. But honest, I wasn't brought up with the idea that I'd work. I think it shocked my father that I really wanted to go to college. It was, I can't even express how far we've come.
On the same note, do you think that's why, for example, the list, it wasn't taken care of as a child because people weren't aware of, you have to struggle 10 times more as an adult, where usually you take care of, because I have a son who has a little bit of list.
Okay, in the 1940s, I want to find out more about this, and I actually intend to. But I don't think they knew that much about how to cure a lisp. Does anybody know more about this than I do? I don't think the medical specialty was there. I think I'd hear my parents discuss it, and they said that, the thought was you outgrow it. But I didn't. But then if you're around somebody who lisps, after a while you don't hear it anymore. And I think it just sort of got lost. But it's when I'd meet somebody fresh who would hear it that that I had the reaction of knowing that they thought that I was stupid.
It's amazing because to hear you speak, it's just your voice is unbelievable and you're so soothing and.
I love you. This is 2019. Are you married?
I can't handle it. Ay. Okay. I'm trying to let go. Okay. Look at that. Hey,
This is what is called a joke.
I know. That's why I'm laughing. All right. Okay. So now you crack me up. So what are you gonna do when you grow up?
What do I?
What do you want to do now? Like, what's your next thing? Like, when you grow up?
No, I do have something. I started a fresh career at age 75.
No way. What are you doing?
Public speaking, and
Woo! You did a good job.
thank you.
I just sit here. I don't have to do anything.
But I speak all over the world. Like in the last 12 months, Dubai, Cayman Islands, coming up, Monaco, Tel Aviv.
Wow.
Woohoo! But to start that career, by the way, I was once so shy I couldn't use the telephone, and to think that I'd be having a career in public speaking. But I took a year-long course with the National Speakers Association, and they want you to practice probably 40 hours a month, and the classes are 8 hours. They're once a month, but they're 8 hours long and they're very intensive. So I decided if I want this career, which I do, that I would study and learn how to do it.
Okay, we have to kind of, we're a little over, but my last question. Has anything ever not worked out for you? I mean, one marriage, but like, anything else? There's everything. I mean, you seem to be very, like everything, it like works.
I have sometimes toyed with the idea of giving a talk of all the times I fell on my face and things didn't work out because right and left. But I'm a deep believer in the law of large numbers. This was, you asked for advice from my father. I can give advice that affects everybody. I was forever asking him when I was a child, how did you do this? And one of the things he said is that his competitors might give up after following 40 leads. He'd go for 100. In other words, try. And I kind of think that that's the story of my life. I've happened to have shared with you the ones that worked out, but right and left, terrible failures.
Wow. Everyone, Mitzi Perdue. Woo! Wait. So what are you doing to keep at 78? Like you have more energy than me. You're so excited. So what are you doing? What are you taking? What are you working out? What do we have to get? What's going on?
Okay, for starters, I take no medications of any kind except occasionally, and this will sound wacko, in my life I've been subject to migraines. I don't get them anymore because Pepto-Bismol seems to cure them.
Really?
Yeah, if anybody gets migraines, try it.
Hey, what are you eating? I mean, you're literally you're like.
Okay, I'm a deep. Here's my diet secrets, everybody. As little processed as possible, and that's kind of the beginning and end of it. I avoid sugar. I'm not rigorous about this, but I eat less bread than I used to. I'd certainly make exceptions, but overall, it's if I have a choice between something processed and something unprocessed, it will always be unprocessed.
Working out?
Oh, well, yes, I do that also.
What do you do?
I'm a gym rat.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
How often?
I'm a deep believer in lifting weights.
Wow.
And also weird, strange yoga postures.
I'm gonna go there. Okay. Woo! Mitzi, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And hope you join us next month. And woohoo!
Thank you so much.
You are so cute. Not well. I had dinner with one.